Maria's life shattered when her husband, James, died unexpectedly. Consumed by sorrow and seeking solace, she stumbled upon a job posting for a cemetery archivist at Edgewood Cemetery, a sprawling and decrepit graveyard on the outskirts of town. The role required cataloging old, forgotten graves, names long erased by time. Maria found an odd sense of peace in the quiet of the cemetery. She applied immediately, her grief blending into the stillness of the graveyard. Her first few weeks on the job passed without incident. By day, Maria pored over faded records, cross-referencing gravestones and filling in gaps. At dusk, she would venture into the cemetery with her lantern and notebook, jotting notes about unmarked graves. Her employer, a reclusive older man named Mr. Whitlock, seemed content with her progress and rarely checked in. It started subtly, an almost imperceptible scratching noise late at night. At first, Maria dismissed it as rodents burrowing beneath the graves, but the sound was persistent. Each time she cataloged an unmarked grave, the scratching seemed to grow louder. The nights felt heavier, the air thicker. One evening, as she worked, her lantern dimmed unexpectedly. The scratching was clearer than ever. She leaned down, pressing her ear close to the soil. The sound came from directly beneath her feet. Her curiosity became unbearable. She decided to investigate one of the graves that had been particularly noisy. Using a shovel borrowed from the cemetery tool shed, she dug late into the night, her breath visible in the cold air. What she uncovered sent a chill through her. The coffin she unearthed was unlike any she'd ever seen. It was locked from the inside, and the lid bore deep claw marks, scratches that seemed to tell of a desperate attempt to escape. Frightened but intrigued, Maria scoured old records for clues. She uncovered stories of the unmarked dead, individuals buried hastily and unceremoniously during times of plague, famine, or war. Legends whispered that some of these souls were interred prematurely, while others were buried for darker reasons, out of fear of what they might become. Compelled by a force she couldn't understand, Maria returned to the unearthed coffin. With trembling hands, she pried off the rusted padlock and opened the lid. Inside, the coffin was empty, but the claw marks continued along its interior. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air. Carved into the coffin walls were cryptic symbols, unlike anything she'd ever seen. The scratching noise, which had grown deafening as she opened the coffin, abruptly stopped. That night, the cemetery came alive. Graves she had cataloged seemed to hum with energy, their soil shifting as though something below was stirring. Maria fled to her small office, locking the door behind her. The scratching noises began again, this time from every direction. Desperate for answers, Maria confronted Mr. Whitlock. He revealed a horrifying truth. Edgewood Cemetery was a prison for restless souls, many of whom had been buried alive centuries ago. The archivist's role was not merely to catalog the graves, but to maintain the fragile barrier keeping the spirits at bay. By disturbing the coffin, Maria had unknowingly broken the seal. Maria realized what she had to do. Using Whitlock's guidance, she sealed the coffin again, etching the protective symbols back onto its lid. With great effort, she lowered it into a newly dug grave and covered it with soil. The cemetery quieted, the scratching noises fading into the early morning light. Though the cemetery seemed peaceful once more, Maria knew its secrets would linger. She remained as the archivist, her grief intertwined with her duty. In the silence of the graveyard, she found a sense of purpose, an eternal vigil for the restless souls of Edgewood Cemetery. Weeks passed, and life settled into an odd routine for Maria. The scratching noises were gone, replaced by a stillness that felt heavier than before. As she worked, she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, not by something hostile, but by something aware. Every time she passed the newly sealed grave, the air seemed to grow colder, the surrounding graves quieter, as if the earth itself held its breath. One evening, she noticed a small detail she had missed before. Near the coffin she had reburied was a line of faint footprints, leading toward the grave and then vanishing into the soil. They were too small to be her own and looked impossibly old, as if pressed into the earth centuries ago. The wind carried voices now, soft murmurs, fragments of words she couldn't understand. At first, Maria thought it was her imagination, but as the days wore on, the whispers grew clearer. They seemed to guide her to specific graves she had not yet catalogued. Each grave she marked brought with it a story, tragedies long forgotten, injustices left unresolved. Maria found herself compelled to leave small offerings at these graves, flowers, coins, or even handwritten notes. Each gesture seemed to bring a sense of calm to the whispers, as though she were fulfilling a role long abandoned. In the cemetery's archives, Maria uncovered a journal belonging to a previous archivist. The entries were erratic, written in a frantic scrawl that grew more unhinged over time. The writer spoke of the Warden of Rest, a being tasked with maintaining the balance between the living and the dead. The role, it seemed, was not merely a job, but a lifelong bond with the cemetery. The final entry chilled Maria. The graves whisper to me, their voices growing louder. I fear I am not enough to keep them contained. If you are reading this, the warden's mantle has passed to you. May you fare better than I did. Maria began to dream of the cemetery. In her dreams, she walked paths that didn't exist in waking life, paths that led to places untouched by time. One night, she found herself before a massive iron door deep in the earth, sealed with a key she had never seen before. When she woke, the same key lay on her desk. Taking the key, she ventured into the oldest part of the cemetery, where gravestones were little more than crumbled stones and moss-covered mounds. There she found a hidden mausoleum. The key fit perfectly into its lock. Inside, Maria discovered the source of the cemetery's power. The altar seemed alive, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic glow. Inscribed upon it were the same symbols she had seen in the coffin. A single phrase, carved in elegant script, caught her attention. To disturb the dead is to awaken the past. She realized that the altar served as a tether between the living and the dead. Her role as the archivist, no, the warden, was to ensure that balance remained intact. Maria stood at a crossroads. She could abandon the role, leave the cemetery behind, and try to live a normal life, though she doubted she could escape its pull. Or she could embrace her duty, knowing it would consume her entirely. As dawn broke, Maria returned to the mausoleum. She placed her hand on the altar and whispered, "I accept." The cemetery seemed to sigh in relief. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. For the first time, Maria felt a strange sense of peace. Maria became the warden of rest, the keeper of secrets, the protector of balance. The cemetery thrived under her watch, its stories preserved, its dead at peace. But she knew the balance was fragile, and one day it might demand more than she was willing to give. For now, she remained silent, watchful, eternal.